Dad, I need you to help me. The wedding's falling apart and I don't know what else to do. It was a Thursday evening in late September. I remember because the leaves outside my kitchen window in Guelph had just started turning. That orange gold color that used to make my wife Margaret stop whatever she was doing just to look. She passed away 4 years ago. Breast cancer. 31 years we were together, and not a day goes by that I don't reach for the phone to tell her something before I remember. I was heating up soup when my daughter called. She was crying, or close to it. That tight, controlled voice she uses when she doesn't want to sound like she's crying, but absolutely is. My daughter. 29 years old, clever, headstrong, beautiful in the way her mother was. Beautiful, all sharp angles and certainty. Her name is Nora. I set down the ladle and turned off the stove. Okay, I said. Tell me what happened. She'd been planning this wedding for 8 months. Her fiancé, a man named Owen, had proposed the previous Christmas in front of both families at his parents' place in Barrie. It had seemed rushed to me. They'd only been together 2 years. But Nora was 30 and wanted what she wanted. And I had learned a long time ago that telling Nora what to do was about as effective as explaining wind to a fence post. The venue had cancelled. That was the story. Some burst pipe situation at the banquet hall in Mississauga they booked, and because the contract had a force majeure clause, they weren't getting their deposit back and now had nowhere for 200 guests in 6 weeks. Owen's parents, she explained, had already stretched thin. His father had been off work with a back injury since the spring, and his mother was dealing with her own health things. We can't ask them for more, Dad. We just can't. She didn't say the next part right away. There was a pause, the kind I've come to recognize over 3 decades of being her father. The pause before the ask. Dad, I looked into it. There's a place in Caledon that had a last-minute cancellation. It's beautiful. It's exactly what I always wanted. But we need to put down a deposit by Monday, or it goes to someone else. How much? I asked. 35,000. I sat down at the kitchen table. Nora. I know, Dad. I know, but I wouldn't ask if I had any other option. You know I wouldn't. I did know that. Or I thought I did. She'd always been proud about money. Too proud sometimes. Wouldn't take a cent from me when she moved out at 23, insisted on paying her own way through the last year of her marketing degree. Worked 2 jobs to cover it. I'd always admired that about her. Where's Owen in all this? I asked. He's trying. He's been making calls all week. But Dad, his seasonal contract ended in August and the new one doesn't start until November. The timing is just... She trailed off. I'm 64 years old. I retired 18 months ago from 32 years as a mechanical engineer at a manufacturing plant outside Cambridge. Margaret and I had been careful with money our whole lives. We didn't take fancy vacations. We drove used cars. We packed lunches. When she died, the life insurance and the pension left me with enough. Enough to be comfortable. Enough for what I'd always assumed would be our retirement years together. Now converted into just my retirement years. That money was supposed to last me. Supposed to be my safety net. But I also have a daughter who sounded like she was holding herself together with both hands. And I have the memory of her at 7 years old riding her bike for the first time down our driveway in Guelph, crashing into the hedge, getting up, brushing off her knees, and trying again without a word. Nora never asked for help easily. That she was asking now meant something. I'll need a few days to move the money around, I told her. The sound she made, relief and gratitude all wrapped up together, I won't forget it. Thank you, Dad. I mean it. You're the only one I could call. I transferred $35,000 from my savings into her account by that Friday afternoon. My entire emergency fund. Everything I'd kept liquid for what Margaret used to call the just-in-cases. The transfer fee alone was $42, which I remember thinking was almost funny. The weeks before the wedding were busy in that way, that busy can disguise itself as connection. Nora texted often. Updates about the caterer, photos of centerpiece options, a question about whether I preferred the salmon or the beef from my dinner plate. I was the father of the bride. Of course I preferred the salmon. Of course I was looking forward to it. I bought a new suit, navy blue, well fitted, from a shop on Stone Road that had been there since I was in my 30s. The tailor, a Portuguese man named Eduardo, who remembered me from the last time I'd been in, for Margaret's funeral, nodded approvingly and told me I carried myself like a man who knew what he was about. I tipped him generously and drove home feeling, I admit, genuinely happy. The wedding was the first weekend of November. I know this precisely because I drove up to Barrie that Friday night to stay at a hotel near the venue, so I wouldn't have to make the drive morning of. I had the ceremony time, the address, the parking instructions. I had the card I'd written for Nora sitting in the inside pocket of the suit jacket, along with a second envelope, $500 in cash, a little extra, something just from me. I called her that Friday evening from the hotel room. "Just checking in," I said. "Getting excited?" "Yeah," she said. She sounded distracted. "Busy, I assumed. Last-minute things." "Yeah, it's all good, Dad." "Sleep well," I told her. "Tomorrow's going to be beautiful." "Mm-hmm. You too, Dad." I had the continental breakfast at the hotel the next morning. I put on the navy suit. I drove to the venue. The parking lot was quiet. Too quiet for a morning when 200 people were supposed to be arriving. I thought at first I had the wrong address. I pulled out my phone and confirmed it. No, I had it right. The same address Nora had texted me 3 weeks ago. I parked and walked up to the front entrance. The building was lovely, a converted heritage barn with string lights still wrapped around the beams outside. There was a small chalkboard sign near the door. A different name on it. A different couple. I went inside. A young woman in a black apron was setting up a floral arrangement near the entrance and looked up when I walked in. "I'm sorry," I said. "I might be in the wrong place. I'm here for my daughter's wedding, Nora and Owen." She looked at me with the careful expression of someone who understood they were about to deliver news that was not theirs to deliver. "I'm sorry, sir. We only have one event today, and that's," she glanced at her clipboard, "the McAllister wedding." I thanked her and went back to my car. I sat there for a while. The November cold came through faster than I expected. I'd left my coat in the back seat and couldn't quite bring myself to reach for it. I called Nora's phone. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. I called again. Same thing. I texted Nora, "I'm at the venue. I think there's been some confusion. Can you call me?" I drove back to the hotel and sat on the edge of the bed in my navy suit and waited. She called me back at 20 past noon. "Dad." Her voice was different from the night before, steadier but careful. "Nora, where are you?" "I went to the venue." "Dad, I need to tell you something." A pause. "The wedding was last weekend. It was October 27th. We changed the date and it was just immediate family. Really small. Owen's parents, his brother, my Aunt Linda and her husband. It was just, we decided we wanted something quiet." I didn't say anything for a long moment. "You were there," I finally said. "It came out quieter than I intended. You got married last weekend." "Yes." "And you didn't tell me." There was a silence on her end that told me everything I needed to know about what kind of silence it was. Not the silence of someone who didn't know what to say. The silence of someone waiting for a particular reaction so they could manage it. "We just wanted it to be low-key, Dad. You know how I feel about big events. We decided last minute." "Nora," I said, "I transferred $35,000 into your account 6 weeks ago." "I know, and that helped so much, Dad. It really did. For a venue in Caledon. For 200 people. For a wedding that apparently became very small and very quiet and happened a week ago." Another pause. "The money went toward, there were a lot of expenses. The deposit we lost, the new costs, Owen had some bills that—" "Stop." I was 64 years old, sitting on a hotel bed in Barrie in a suit I'd bought to watch my daughter get married, and she had been married for 7 days already. I need to think. I'll call you later. I drove home to Guelph. I did not stop for lunch. I put the suit back in the garment bag when I got home, and I hung it in the closet beside Margaret's old winter coats that I still haven't moved, and I stood there in the dark of the closet for a while before going to make tea. Over the following days, I let myself process it slowly. I am not a man given to large emotional outbursts. I was raised in southwestern Ontario by people who believed that grief and anger both deserved a quiet room and some time, not an audience, so I processed it quietly. What I arrived at was this: the wedding had not, in fact, been cancelled and moved. I started to understand that gradually, working backward. The force majeure clause Nora had described. Owen's contract ending in August. The urgency of the Monday deadline. The number 35,000, which turned out to be exact enough to cover a different set of expenses entirely. I'm an engineer. I'm used to looking at how things actually fit together. I called my brother Frank, who lives outside Kitchener and who has known my daughter since she was born. He listened without interrupting, which is something I've always appreciated about Frank. "What are you going to do?" he asked when I finished. "I don't know yet," I said, "but I know what I'm not going to do." Nora called 3 weeks later, a Saturday morning. She sounded lighter, warmer. The crisis apparently had passed and we were back to normal. "Hey, Dad, how are you doing? We've been settling in. The new place is really coming together." New place. That was the first I'd heard of a new place. "Owen and I found a house," she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "It's in Essa Township, just north of Barrie. 3 bedrooms. We got a good price because it needs some work, but Owen's handy, you know, and—" "That's nice," I said. "The thing is, we're a bit stretched right now with the move and everything, and the mortgage payment came in higher than we expected this first month because of the property tax adjustment, and I was wondering, just for this once, just to get us over the hump, if you could help with the payment. It's just over $2,000, and if you could cover it this month, we'd pay you back by Nora. February at the latest, we just need Nora." She stopped. "I wasn't invited to your wedding," I said. "You took $35,000 from me and told me it was for a venue and a caterer and 200 guests. And then you got married on a Saturday in October without me there and didn't mention it until I was sitting in an empty parking lot in Barrie in my good suit." I kept my voice level. I had practiced this, not the words exactly, but the level. "I have been your father for 29 years. I was there the night you were born, in that hospital on Stone Road in the middle of a February ice storm. I drove 40 kilometers an hour on the 401 because your mother's contractions were 4 minutes apart, and I could not risk going faster. I was the one holding the camera when you took your first steps in the kitchen. I was at every school play and every track meet and every graduation. I drove 11 hours to Halifax when you called me crying at 2 in the morning, at the end of your second year of university. And I turned around and drove back the next afternoon once I knew you were all right. I did not miss a single important day of your life." I paused, "and you decided I wasn't family enough to be at your wedding." She didn't say anything. "I'm not going to help with the mortgage," I said. "If the family couldn't cover the venue and the mortgage and whatever else that money went toward, then the family can sort out the mortgage too." There was a long, unsteady breath on her end. "Then, Dad, that's not—" "I love you, Nora. I will always love you. But I am 64 years old and I have enough years behind me to know the difference between a father and a bank. You've been treating me like the latter for a while now, and I let it happen because I thought it was love. It wasn't. It was convenience." I heard her starting to speak and I said gently, "Take care of yourself," and I hung up. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time after that. The afternoon light came through the window the way it does in November, low and golden and a little sad, the way all November light is in Ontario. Margaret would have put her hand on mine across the table. She had a way of sitting with me in hard moments without trying to fix them. I didn't change my number. I didn't write a new will that week, though I did make an appointment with my lawyer for the following month to have some things reviewed. I didn't go no contact the way some people in these situations apparently do, because I don't think that serves anyone, and also because I am 64 years old and I no longer have the appetite for dramatic gestures. But I also did not help with the mortgage, and I did not send a Christmas card that year with a check tucked inside the way I had every year for the past decade. What I did instead was go for a long drive on a Tuesday afternoon out through the countryside past Elora, where Margaret and I used to go on weekends when we first moved to Guelph. I stopped at a small restaurant there and had the soup of the day, roasted squash, and a roll and a cup of Earl Grey tea. I sat by the window and watched a young couple at the next table arguing gently about something on their shared phone, both of them leaning in. And I thought about the 31 years I had with a woman who never once made me feel like a resource to be managed. That's not nothing. That is, in fact, a great deal. I left a generous tip and drove home in the early dark. And when I got back to Guelph, the leaves were all the way down now, just the bare branches against the last bit of sky, and the house was quiet in the way it always is, and I made myself dinner and sat at the kitchen table. And for the first time in a long time I felt like the quiet was mine. There's a particular kind of hurt that doesn't announce itself loudly. It doesn't arrive with shouting or broken dishes. It comes in quietly, the way cold comes through an old window frame. You don't notice it at first. And then one day you realize you've been shivering for a long time. I think about the morning I drove to that venue in Barrie in my navy suit. I think about how I checked my reflection in the hotel mirror and thought, not without some vanity, that I looked like a man who had earned this day. And I had. 35 years of packed lunches and used cars and putting everyone else's needs before my own. I had earned the right to stand at the end of an aisle and watch my daughter walk toward the rest of her life. Instead, I sat in an empty parking lot and read a chalkboard with a stranger's name on it. What I've had to reckon with in the months since is my own part in it. That's the uncomfortable thing nobody talks about in these situations. It's easier to be the wronged party, and I was wronged. I'm not pretending otherwise. But honesty requires me to look at the longer story. I gave Nora everything she asked for, always, without much question. Not because I was naive. Because I loved her, and because giving felt like the clearest proof of that love. I confused generosity with connection. I thought money and presents meant the same thing to her that they meant to me. They didn't. And somewhere along the way, I taught her that I was available without limit. That there was no ask too large, no boundary. I wouldn't quietly step over if she needed me to. I don't say this to excuse what she did. Taking $35,000 under false pretenses and then calling a month later about a mortgage payment. That takes a particular kind of moral carelessness that belongs to her, not me. But I'd be lying if I said I hadn't built some of the conditions for it. What I've come to believe is that doing right by the people you love sometimes means saying no. Not to punish them, not out of bitterness. But because a person who never hears the word no from you doesn't learn to stand on their own, and a person who can't stand on their own will keep reaching for the nearest support. Which, for Nora, was always me. I should have been her father, not her safety net. Those are different things, and I blurred them for too long. There's also something to be said for paying attention. I'm an engineer. I spent 32 years looking at systems, finding the points where things didn't add up. I should have asked more questions in September when she called. The urgency, the specific number, the Monday deadline, it had the shape of something constructed. I chose not to see it because I wanted to believe in her. That was my failure of judgment, and it cost me. But I got up from it. I made my appointment with the lawyer. I drove out to Elora on a Tuesday and had squash soup by the window. I let myself feel the grief of it. Because it is grief, losing the version of your child you thought you knew. And then I kept going. That's all any of us can do, really. Feel it honestly, understand it clearly, and keep going anyway. The quiet in my house is mine now. That took some getting used to, but it's mine.